season isn't quite long enough to grow fully developed ginger that's going to have kind of a tough skin. So it's more of a baby ginger. And it's actually really nice for cooking. The flavor is excellent, and the skin is really thin. You don't have to peel it. So, but you won't, say, get fully developed ginger that you would be able to use as, for ginger, we grow it sort of like garlic. So we'll use the roots, the rhizomes, as our seed for the next year. You wouldn't be able to really get it to a stage that you could save it for seed. So you have to buy some in, and then we would start them really early in the greenhouse and get them to at least develop a small shoot before transplanting them, because they're fairly long. When you grow fully mature ginger, it takes a little bit over a whole year.
Wow.
So we're trying to adapt it to grow here, and there's a good market for it. And it's
I've heard. So this is a relatively new study we're doing. We have, let me see, 8 varieties of table grapes in here. If you're curious, you're welcome to look at these tags. It says a variety. This is Concord seedless. And then we have 3 different trellising systems. We have it's called modified Munson. We have vertical shoot positioning and top wire cordon. So one will be a little bit lower and 2 of them will be higher. We're trying to determine what the best trellising system would be for our location with these table grapes. It might vary depending on variety. What the yield potential is for the varieties. And just determine if it's a suitable specialty crop. There are a few producers who do table grapes in New Hampshire already, and actually there were some preliminary trials on farms that helped us decide which varieties we were going to be using. So these were planted 2 years ago. This is the first year we're really seeing any fruit, or significant amount of fruit. But it takes at least 3 years, I think, to get all of the 3 trellising systems established. So the first year you grow, you just grow the plant, then you might lay one, develop the arms, and then lay them the next year. There's
Michigan and North Carolina.
So these are all Brussels sprouts here. We have about 2 or 3 studies happening in this one little field. The first one is a topping experiment, which we've been doing for several years. Basically, what that means is if we cut off the growing point of the Brussels sprout plant at a certain time, it can help us develop more uniform Brussels sprouts all the way up the stalk and make the stalk more saleable just as a whole stalk. So we're still trying to work out the kinks on exactly when is the best time to do that for each variety. The second study is is another graduate student, Alina Harris, who just started in our lab, and she is looking at the effect of habitat plants, which you can see in the back there. We have alyssum, fennel, dill, buckwheat, and cilantro, and phacelia, and what the effect is on them bringing in beneficial insects. And so how far away from those are they still effectively bringing in beneficial insects? What we've found from previous studies here in our lab is that they do increase the populations of beneficial insects, but not enough to decrease the aphid problem in Brussels sprouts. So brings us to our third project in here, which is to trial organic pesticides for their efficacy. So we have 3 different organic pesticides that we're using, and we are applying them when we reach economic threshold. And so that's when the aphid population is so big that we need to do something about it. So that's what's happening in here. There's a lot going on.
So I'm Erin, and I'm part of the Davis lab at UNH. So this is a relatively new project for us. So the quinoa project, or the quinopodium project, was actually inspired by a former master's student. So the girl who was before me in our lab had done a project where she went around to organic farms and took soil samples out of the fields, and they brought them back to the greenhouse and sprouted them and just allowed whatever weed seeds were in the soil to grow. And she was basically cataloging how the weeds had changed, how the native populations of weeds were kind of changing in terms of climate change. So that was kind of a larger, because weeds are very adaptable, which is something I'll talk a little bit about. So that's something that as growers, it's very important for us to understand, is how they're kind of adapting and changing in response to environmental change. A big part of my research is trying to understand not so much quinoa, but trying to understand all of these guys who are the native weeds that belong to this genus that are located here. We're trying to breed some of these weedy species with quinoa so that it kind of makes quinoa more adapted to this location, so that a grower could maybe, if they have a couple extra fields, could maybe put in something that was, adapted to our local diseases and our weather patterns and that sort of thing, so that they'd be able to get a good crop.
And basically tomatoes are luxury consumers of potassium. And potassium deficiency has been correlated with yellow shoulder, which you can kind of see right here how this is going to probably remain yellow. And so we're trying to determine what the optimum rate of potassium is to reduce yellow shoulder as much as we can, but there are other things like heat and sun that can also contribute to yellow shoulder. Because they use so much potassium and we're in this protected environment instead of in field production, we need to establish a recommendation for growers, because so many growers do this tunnel tomato production. And one thing we'll be doing going forward, I learned the other day, is focusing on nitrogen, because this is organically managed. And it's very hard, or can be hard, to apply nitrogen through the drip irrigation, which is in this black plastic here, that we irrigate them with weekly. So my advisor Becky is going to probably be looking at maybe multiple applications of nitrogen through the course of the season instead of only at the beginning, which is what most organic producers do.